Alright guys, welcome back to Willpower Garage and my journey to Dragweek 2025. In the last video, I was cutting and modifying my Ford 8.8 rear axle to fit inside my 1985 Pontiac Trans Am. So you saw me where I utilized that Hilti mount to weld to the center differential. And the last part was I fit my axle tubes that I machined down to the ID of the old axle tubes to the OD of my new, and then was able to insert those into it. So today's video is going to be a continuation of that. What I've done so far off camera though is I welded those axle tubes to the center section, as well as the old axle tubes to the center section. And the reason for that is these axles utilize these sort of pin plug welds, and they're known to break and then cause the axle to slip. And the last thing you want to happen on a drag strip is that axle to slip or pull out and lose a wheel. So I've already gone ahead and welded both the new axle tubes to the old and then the old tubes to the center section. What I'm working on now is locating where the new bearing carriers are going to go for the brakes and what's going to hold the axle into the housing. So I've got my measurements made and I've cut those axle tubes to length. And right now I'm just going to try to find where the left and right backing plates go. We'll make a couple of marks. I'm going to spot weld those into place, or tack weld rather, those into place. And then I'm probably going to fully weld them. I can tell you right now, just looking at my axle tubes, that the tubes are slightly bent, and I do have my truing bar in here, so I'll be able to heat the tube and quench it where I need the bar to move so that I can make sure my axles are perfectly straight. There's no bend, twist, or anything that's going to cause premature bearing failure on these things, because if you don't true up your rear axle, the tubes, you will kill bearings really fast. So let me show you guys what I have going on so far, and we'll get to start welding some of this together. Alright, so these are my Mosier flush mount Ford big bearing brake mount backing plates, bearing carriers, I don't know what you call them exactly, housing ends. There it is. These are my housing ends. So this is my truing bar. I machined a couple of cups that's going to make sure that this axle tube and this bearing carrier are perfectly in line with my axle tube, or I should say perfectly in line with my differential. So as you can see, I've got another set here that locate the center line where the axles come in, and it goes from one end to the other. So what I've got going on here in this contraption is I want to locate where my brake caliber is going to be. So I've got a couple of weld clamps here, magnetic type, and I'm going to make a couple of marks on here to locate this, and then I'm going to just tack weld it in place, make sure it's right, and then I'll come back and finish weld these. Like I said, I could tell you right now, if you look at this side, I've got more of a gap here than I do on this side. So right now, this axle tube is bent this way. So I'll have to heat it and quench it to get it to move the direction I want. And like I said, what I'll do is once these bearing ends are welded on, I can use this to slide in, and as I heat this thing and quench it, I should be able to see this slide in nice and easy. I don't want to have any resistance. I'll know that it's perfectly true. So let me make my marks here on my axle ends and get those things tack welded into place. Alright, so I have my bearing ends tack welded in place on both sides, and now I'm trying to locate where my Panhard bar here, the bracket is in relation to the old axle. So what I did was I measured from the bearing backing plate here to the center line of the mounting bolt hole there. And then I subtracted my 3/8 of an inch, which is different on these brakes that I'm installing on here, and that got me the 7 1/4. What I then did was I also took the pinion angle, zeroed it out, and then set this at the same angle here on the back. I got that number from comparing it on here. So I'm going to tack this into place first, then I'm going to locate my lower control arm brackets, and once I have those located, I can then locate my shock mounts for my coilovers. So let me tack this guy into place first, and then we'll take some more measurements for the lower control arm bracket. I've got all my suspension mounting brackets tack welded in place. I've got my axle bearing housing ends tack welded in place. I think what I'm going to do is probably, today is Saturday, Monday, I'm going to call Mosier and I'm going to order the axles I need for this now that I have measurements before I do a final weld. And that's just in case they tell me something is going to be a little longer or shorter. I can compensate for that before it's fully welded. But I've got my panhard bracket tacked into place. I've got my lower control arm brackets tacked into place, and my adjustable shock mounts tacked into place. And I got all those measurements from the old axle, which I fortunately still have. So I took my measurements from the axle ends there and found my centers for all those and just copied it to the new brackets. Now the new brackets are a little narrower here, but I do have full adjustability. You can see everything's just sort of tack welded into place. So if I have to remove it or move it, it's way easier to do that now. You can see just tack welds on here. I did mock up just my brake backing plate, and when I did that I realized that there is going to be another plate in between here to hold the bearing into place. So it's going to shift this a little bit further away. It shouldn't really make much of a difference. It's probably just, you know, a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch thick plate. But I got both of them mounted here just so I can see what this thing is looking like. So next step, order axles and then finish weld all this stuff on. Well, after that, then I can straighten my axle tubes, because my axle tubes are a little bit off. But so far it's looking good. I've got the axle basically mocked up. Well, not basically, I've got it mocked up. I've got everything where I want it. I had to order some shorter shocks so I can get the right suspension travel I wanted. So I had full compression and rebound out of the shock that I wanted, but still have adjustability on the lower shock mount so I can adjust the ride height. I basically set the car where I think I want my ideal ride height and made sure that I had good travel, both compression and rebound. The shocks I have about 5 inches total travel. Would have been nice to keep the 6.5 that I had before, but it just wasn't going to work utilizing the custom mount on the top of the coilover conversion. So we'll take it for what it is. Like I said, this is not going to be just a straight race car. This is going to be also a street car that I also want to enjoy with my family. So I moved the lower control arm brackets. They are now in the right location. The axle is centered in the wheel arch at ride height, which is what I wanted. I mounted my shock mounts, the lower mounts that go to the axle tube. I did have to take about 1/4 inch of material out of those brackets so that I can move them closer into the axle tube. And the reason for that was I needed more clearance for the coil spring. I just wanted to have as much clearance in everything as I could. I probably could have just cut off a lot of those extra holes that I'll never use. But, you know, this was easy. I have a bridge port. I can mill it right off and get it pretty accurate. So I did that. I made the modifications to my torque arm mount. so that I have clearance on the tunnel where it used to actually hit the floor. So all that's squared away now. I'm now ready to finally fully weld up this axle. So let me show you guys the axle now where everything's in place, and I'm going to start welding this thing up so I could finally get it in the car. Well, I'm going to weld it up, then I'm going to straighten the axle tubes because currently they are not straight, and then we'll fully build this thing and get it back into the car. So let me show you what I have right now. Okay, so as you can see, all my brackets are where I want them. This one is clamped on currently because I had to shift it over. You know, I kind of tacked these things in place in the car, so it wasn't easy to see that this bracket was a little crooked. So I wanted to make sure that that one was straight. I also went ahead and installed my sway bar. This is a sway bar from UMI Performance, and it is made for drag racing. It uses these really big turnbuckles here, and what you can do with this is you can actually set preload on the one side so that your car will launch nice and flat instead of doing, you know, the Cletus McFarlane launch in his cheap car challenge. So I put these on because I'm going to tack these into place so I don't have to worry about them rotating. And then I'm going to come around and I'm going to weld everything else up, including the axle ends. I anticipate this axle to warp a little bit more, and as you can see right now, I can't get my bushing in because the axle is currently bent in this direction. So once I get all that done, I'm going to straighten these axle tubes, make sure everything goes together nice, and then probably get this thing a coat of paint before I put in my differential, my axles, which I already have, and I could finally make this thing a roller again. So cue the time lapse and let's get to welding. Alright, so there it is. Everything's welded. Everything's in good shape. I got my sway bar brackets welded on. Everything's welded all the way around. Cleaned it up a little bit. And now I'm ready to fix my alignment. As you can see, I've got a big gap here. Nothing there. I can't get the alignment puck in on either side. See, this one's a little different. My gap is down here. Can't get it in over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an oxygen acetylene torch. Got my tanks over there, and basically what I'm going to do is, since this gap is here and it's too tight here, I know this axle tube is bent down. So what I'm going to do is, in this area here, I'm going to heat the tube up till I got basically a dull red color, and then I'm going to use my bucket full of cold water here, and I'm going to quench this area. What that's going to do is it's going to shrink the metal, therefore bringing this side of the axle tube up, and I'm going to do that until I can slide this thing in easily. I don't want to deflect this bar at all. I want this thing to slide in and out nice. Right now it is currently centered in the housing here. These are two more alignment pucks. This holds the center line here where the bearing, where the differential carrier is going to be. So as long as this bar is captured here and I could slide this in and out nice and easy, I know my axle tube is lined up here. So I don't have to worry about any kind of bearing failures, axle breaking, and I'll just have a nice true rear axle. So as you can see, I got to do it to both sides, but it shouldn't be all that difficult. So let me set up the camera and I'm going to start heating this thing up, see what we can get. I got the axle straight. What a pain in the butt that was. I wish I had like a chassis table or a fixture table where I could have jigged this thing up, then welded it so it wouldn't have been so far off like it was. But I was able to get it straight using an oxygen acetylene torch, as you saw in the time lapse. I did not film the entire thing because it took me the better part of a couple hours to do both sides and to get this thing straight. Yeah, the way it is now here, as you see, my little adapters here slide right in and out of the axle tubes ends. Both sides, they're probably within, you know, a couple thousandths or so, but they go in nice and easy. So now I can finally put my axles in, but before I go to assemble this, I'm going to remove my fuel tank. I'm going to seam seal the floor where I still need to, and I'm going to paint all of this stuff all at once. So the bottom of the floor pans, the rear axle, I gotta do a little prep work above the gas tank, the adjustable lower control arms I made, and paint those as well. Going to paint the cross member, because right now this is just in pour 15, and that way I have a good base where I could start putting stuff back into this car. It's currently mid-July, and I've got boxes and boxes of parts, but I haven't been able to put them in because I was building the axle, I was building the transmission, getting the chassis ready. But I'd like to be able to get this to be a roller again so I can get this thing in and out of the shop as I need. It would also be nice because I have someone coming Saturday to certify the roll cage. So I want to get that certified sooner than later in case I need to make any changes. That cage was done probably 20 years ago, and I want to make sure that it still meets certification today. So yeah, my plan today is to basically just get all this stuff painted, dry tomorrow, probably assemble the rear axle, and then I'll start putting my front suspension in with my new double adjustable coilover setup in the front, as well as my new Willwood front big brake kit. So I've got a lot of the machining done on the spindles. I just have to put them together and get those in too. And then I should finally have a rolling chassis again, and I can finally focus on putting that together. Let's get at it. All right, there it is. Everything's hanging up. Got my paint mixed up. Ready to spray all this so I can finally start putting the car together. Here we go.